I just want to make a quick reference to the bill that was brought in by the Labour Party yesterday in relation to trans healthcare. It was startling for a number of reasons. First of all, it's probably one of the biggest examples, I think, where there is a disconnect between the Dáil bubble and the people of Ireland on issues. The vast majority of people in this country believe that a woman is a female adult and don't believe that a man can get pregnant, and also believe that education should be on the basis of science as well. The second issue that struck me about yesterday was that TDs were willing to throw out scientific evidence on the basis of ideology. That the safety of children and the protection of children was actually being foregone on the basis of an intellectual fashion. And that's a major threat to well-being in this country. The third issue was that only 8 TDs out of 174 actually stood up for a vote on this particular issue. 166 TDs stayed silent and stayed seated in relation to that. And also, if we're honest, a number of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael TDs did mention to me during the day that they saw the speech that we gave on the particular issue and that they agreed with the speech. And I think that's a problem. And I will say to TDs, especially new TDs, you may be here for a term or 2 or 3. But in that time, if you don't stand up for what you believe in, if you don't vote for what you believe in, you may as well not be here. Somebody else might as well be in that seat. Because if we're not actually voting on the basis of our own principles, somebody else is in that seat in many ways. So my advice to those TDs is to wake up and make sure that they use the time they have here in the best way they can. I mentioned yesterday that obviously Aontú is a pluralist Republican political party. We believe all citizens are equal and all citizens should be treated equally and valued, no matter what their identity, ethnicity, religion or orientation is. I mentioned that gender dysphoria is real. It's not easy. People who have it should be treated with respect, but the treatment that they get should be on the basis of science and not on the basis of ideology. Basing treatment on ideology is actually quite dangerous. Now, I want to just talk about the Gender Recognition Act. The Gender Recognition Act is problematic at the moment, and I'll tell you why. It includes self-identification. It means that anybody, for any reason, can identify themselves as the opposite gender. Now, I'm sure that the vast majority of people who use the Gender Recognition Act absolutely feel that they themselves are the opposite gender. But the Gender Recognition Act has no gatekeeper. And as a result, there's no doctor, there's no psychiatrist who determines whether or not a person is transgender. Anybody can use a gender recognition certificate, and that allows for potentially bad actors to use that loophole for opportunistic reasons. Now, I'm not saying for a second that any person who has gender dysphoria is any more likely than the general population to have a propensity for bad action. I'm not saying that for a second, but I'm saying that the GORA is designed without a gatekeeper, and as a result, it allows people to use it for bad reasons. Now, women and girls have the right to safe spaces. It's actually shocking that I have to say that. We've understood that for hundreds of years. The vast majority of physical and sexual attacks that happen on women are carried out by men. And indeed, incredibly, many of the parties that sit right beside us here on a regular basis talk about gender-based violence, but they develop a blind spot in relation to the protection of women-only safe spaces. So as one of the consequences of the Gender Recognition Act is that it allows for male-born criminals to be placed in women's prisons. And that's quite incredible, because the female prisoners and the female staff have no option but to be in that location. And the state is putting male-born sex offenders, men, into those prisons. And look, we have this absurd situation there where we had Barbie Kardashian. He was found guilty of threatening to kill, rape, and torture his mother. Barbie Kardashian was granted a gender recognition certificate by the Department of Social Protection and, as a result, was placed in a women's prison. Your government stood over Barbie Kardashian being placed in a women's prison. Now, that is a horrendous dereliction of duty in relation to this government. It's against all the prevailing winds on the medical basis, on the science basis, and even the political basis, and yet your government stood up for that. The Ministry for Justice in Britain have released very interesting statistics in relation to people in prison who declare themselves as transgender, and many of them are in prison because of sexual offences. The vast majority of these trans sex offenders were born male, and the Ministry for Justice statistics show that transgender women exhibit male-type pattern of criminality. It's clear that this data shows that self-identification is being unfortunately used opportunistically. The Aontú Bill is designed simply to prevent male-born criminals being placed in women's prisons. Our bill provides for a gender recognition certificate does not affect whether a person is deemed male or female for the purpose of applying for the existing rule of single-sex accommodation in prisons, and I would urge the government to support it.